Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be taking a trip up to Ocala, Florida with my friend Dakota for 3 days of rail fanning and finding new locations along the S-Line. Now one of the main purposes and reasons I wanted to go to Ocala in the first place was to also film the Florida Northern, but they'd be in their yard the entire time we'd be there. So for you CSX fans, this video is pretty much all S-Line at all hours of the day. Ironically, the only time we'd see Florida Northern was as soon as we arrived around 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. This is FNOR's Ocala headquarters located right off Magnolia Avenue in the heart of said town's commercial/industrial district. There's a couple of engines staged here, including an original CF7 from the 50s and a Jeep 9. Hearing this morning's crew heading down to the interchange, however, we'd follow them west about a mile. Ocala doesn't have the title of a yard, but it's definitely one of CSX's larger interchange facilities in the state. Seeing mostly rock traffic for Anderson, Columbia north of town, there's still a plethora of industries along the short line, enough to make the Florida Northern's rig a Monday through Friday operation. We'd set up at the 6th Avenue crossing to watch as Jeep 11 and a Jeep 10 pair would shove into the interchange tracks to create a full train. Last night, local L754 dropped these cars here for Florida Northern, an operation that we'll get more into later in this video. For now, our crew would couple on to their 2 cuts and eventually back the entire train down the south leg of the Y and into their 3-track yard. Unfortunately for us, the yard north of us is back in the woods and hard to see on public property, so we'd break off here, hearing a CSX train somewhere out there on the main line. Turns out the train was M453 and he was already calling signals through town, so we'd book it south, beating the train by about 2 minutes to the Lake Weir Avenue crossing. Right in front of us is the Ocala defect detector at milepost S739.7. About a half mile down the tracks to the south is an ABS signal called by crews as distant to Santos for southbounds and distant to Ocala for northbounds. The track layout here at Ocala is interesting because its 6-mile double track wasn't completely new construction, but a combination of 2 sidings. The Ocala siding to the north and the small Singletary to the south. Around 2012, the sidings were extended to meet each other in downtown, with the old South End Ocala control point becoming 8th Avenue, a universal mainline crossover. Because both sidings broke off to the left looking north, Track 2 is the main line, while Track 1 is technically the siding. This is similar to the construction at the St. Catherine double track down near Bushnell.
CSX detector, milepost 739.7, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axles 348. Detector out.
We'd move north back into town now with Dakota, as we knew northbound train M452 was on its way north coming our way out of Wildwood. We'd set up on the Silver Springs Avenue overpass that looks straight down at the quad gates of Broadway Street. One con of Ocala rail fanning is the absence of horns. All downtown crossings that span the double track here are quiet zones, which means trains can sneak up on you, especially when the crew isn't very present on the radio. Looking over 452 is a good way to see what he has. The familiar rock cuts are no longer seen on him, as that's being taken care of by the new Miami rock shuttles. Now 452 is general freight out of Hialeah and Wildwood, always with a sizable cut of auto racks from Palm Center. Today would be no different, with over 40 racks bringing up the tail end. An hour would pass, and after grabbing a late breakfast in downtown, we'd head down to the depot as we knew of a southbound approaching. The Florida Northern job would be completed by now, taking all of the cars CSX dropped for them in their yard, completely emptying the interchange yard. Only seen like this in the couple of hours before the short line returns the empties here, usually an afternoon job. So we take the opportunity, setting up under the Pine Avenue overpass, to catch L743, rounding the S-curve into town. He's on track 2 now, which is the main, contradicting CSX's tradition of having track 1 being the main.
FXL 743. 183179 clear. That's Ocala. Number 2 track southbound up.
As many of you know, the S-Line tends to be extremely dead during the day, as because the state consists of mostly terminals, trains usually depart and arrive in the early morning hours or overnight. After 7:43, there'd be nothing till the evening, so we'd take some time to relax and enjoy downtown Ocala, even amidst the scorching Thames. Sunset would find us in Bellevue, as we'd find a spot just north of town where the S-Line parallels a small neighborhood road, dipping into a tree canopy just after the crossing. The peaceful quiet of the cooling summer night would be broken by the unmistakable horn of a CSX EMD locomotive, leading tonight's shipment of Tampa Intermodal for Jacksonville. Meeting the IO-44 at Ocala would be its sister train, IO-45, southbound intermodal for Tampa from Jacksonville. We'd head back up to Lake Weir for a shot of 45 rounding the curve, as the distant to Santos signal would upgrade from an approach to approach limited, and finally a high green. Since February, the Tampa intermodals have been running on and off with only one motor. Not a very appealing change for rail fans, including myself. It's surprising, with so much priority on these trains, that the railroad trusts one locomotive to get the train to its terminal. I can only imagine what the consequences will be with UPS and other customers when one of these engines finally gives out and delays the train for hours. For now, though, it seems the system's working, and one engine has become the new norm.
CSX detector, milepost 739.7. No defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axles 154. Detector out.
Good south I-45.
Back into Ocala and the suitable lighting for nighttime filming there, we'd arrive with a high green for train M604. This train's been leaving Winston right behind I-44 lately, getting to us here just before 10 p.m., which is when his counterpart train M603 would also be approaching. The meet would happen around 8th Avenue, giving us just enough time for 604's bottom end to clear before 603's arrival. Routed on track 1 would come M603, a train that a few years ago would be going through here after midnight, now an evening staple, sometimes even seen here at sunset, but not tonight. Lots of merchandise on this one, bound for Winston via Folkestone, Baldwin, Wildwood, and Lakeland. Ocala's downtown would surprise me, as not only is it really quiet and peaceful, but also motionless. It's definitely one of the safest places that one can be for late night rail fanning, around the depot at least. The police station down the road obviously helps with that, but Dakota and I wouldn't have a single encounter in all 3 days we'd be out here. The full moon would also light up the night well, as the street lights and freight office would illuminate the tracks, and another green for another northbound. Across the tracks and road is a dwarf signal that's not used anymore, but is still operational, installed to guide trains out of the yard here and over the diamond. The nightly local and Florida Northern crews are the only ones who get close to it, as trains like L729 roll by on the main line, guided by Ocala's pair of signal cantilevers. "30 minutes later, southbound M441 would light up the radio with its approach just before midnight.
44119, clear signal, Ocala, no locking engine. 3048, 2 mile up.
It's a shame that this train doesn't run in daylight anymore, as just over a year ago it was a morning staple and then a golden hour evening train. Now it's only seen under the cover of darkness here, tonight passing at 11:44 p.m. "441 is freight for Tampa from Waycross, with stops in Baldwin and occasionally Wildwood. Tonight the crew would be handing off the Jeep 38-3 in the third position to the Wildwood local to use for the next few weeks on switching jobs out of the small yard. And just like southbound's M457 and M453, a large cut of auto racks bring up the rear of this one, destined for Tampa's TDSI terminal in Drew Park. 30 minutes later and following the 441 south would be I-177, intermodal out of Jax for Winter Haven and the Central Florida Logistics Center there. A light drizzle would begin as soon as the train would round the curve, evident by the large blotch on my camera screen. Sometimes, though, that's just how it goes.
Check 17719 and then approach Ocala. CSX locomotive 3102 south of 1.
I-177 would be slowing to a stop at Singletary to meet its counterpart I-178, the northbound version of this train. He'd be here in about 15 minutes with a long train out of Winter Haven and a friendly crew at the helm.
7819, got a clear track number 2, northbound Ocala, locomotive 7014 out.
I-178 would end our night just before 1 in the morning, as we still had to sleep and would be up the next morning to see the couple of daylight trains this area still gets. Leaving the hotel just ahead of the train, we'd set up at Singletary as M453 booked over the US 441 overpass. This is one of 3 overpasses in Ocala, as the railroad swings through town east to west and then back out to the east at the south end. Meeting this train at Wildwood would be its counterpart, 452, who'd be soon departing northbound after its pickup at the yard. We'd move north a good 13 miles to the south end of Anthony Siding at milepost S725.7. Anthony is a favorite of dispatchers to meet trains, as it's 10,500 feet in length end to end, with only one private crossing halfway through. There'd be no meet here today, however, as 452 would have a high green, highballing his way north. Later in the day, we'd go around exploring the back roads of Ocala, pulling off at Silver Springs, one of Florida's original amusement parks from the 20th century. There's no rides or fanfare like a normal theme park, with the focus being the natural beauty of these Floridian springs. Glass-bottom boats here take passengers for a tour, revealing how crystal clear the water is. It'd be a nice spot for us to relax for a while, but we'd leave quickly after hearing a southbound train out there around 3 p.m. Back into Bellevue, we'd set up at the same crossing where we filmed IO-44 last night, this time pointing our cameras to the north, towards a natural tree tunnel and train L743. Coming south with Rockford, Wildwood, and Lakeland, this is by far one of the coolest scenes I've documented in Central Florida. A few hours later, and after taking a nap at the hotel, we'd venture up the line a little ways to Loch Lusa, a small siding on the S-Line by today's standards, located south of Hawthorne and just north of Spar. From the Burnt Island boat ramp road crossing, one can see from one end of Loch Lusa to another, at the south end tonight being lined for a southbound, displaying a green for IO45, led by another SD70 with a short train of containers for Tampa.
6 hour 45, 20 locomotive, 16, 45, 85. Clear south of Loch Lusa, main.
Lined behind the 45 would be another southbound, one that we'd set up for after relocating up past the north end of the siding to the boat ramp to enjoy the sunset and the quiet of this small community. Loch Lusa has to be one of the most scenic spots among the usual wilderness that the S-Line cuts through. Being one of the larger lakes in the area, the Seaboard had no chance but to run right around it, and they'd build their main line right along its banks, making a shot like this M603 passing the Golden Lake possible at 8:24 p.m. Back into Ocala, we'd follow M603, pulling in and setting up just west of the freight house in time to see a double green indication on the Ocala signal cantilever. On track 1 to the left, IO44 would be lined, and M604 would be lined on track 2. 604 would get here first and eventually stop at the north end of the double track at Silver Springs in order to let the faster, higher priority IO44 go around him.
CSXT M60420, CSX 965, clear, Ocala, number 2965 out.
M60420, lead locomotive, CSXT 965, got an approach 8th Avenue, 2 northbound.
Just 7 minutes behind 604 would be 44, with a solo YN2 AC44 leading a string of Tropicana reefers and Tampa's backhaul of intermodal merchandise.
6 hour 4420, locomotive, CSXT 153, clear, Ocala, track 1 northbound. CSXT M60420, CSXT 965, number 965 out. 4420, locomotive, CSXT 153, approach limited, 8th Avenue, track 1 northbound.
We'd head out for some dinner and return to the tracks just under an hour later to see an approach signal lit for a northbound on track 1. Soon, L754 would round the bend into town with 2 EMD general purpose variants and a good train for the Florida Northern and their interchange. CSX 2813 and 2038 is our power tonight, the second unit being the Jeep 38 that was dropped in Wildwood by 441 last night. Now the locomotives have been paired for service, currently uncoupling from their train in order to pull out the empties bound for Wildwood. After the engines pull by the mainline switch just past Magnolia Avenue, one of 2 conductors on this crew tonight steps out to line the switch for the interchange yard, while the other unlocks derails and lines switches for the first pickup.
2813 ground point clear, protecting the shove. Switches line lock for our movement in hand throw position. Backing back 2 cars. Talking to Chuck.
If everybody's clear, come on back here and get the gates down, please.
The way Florida Northern is switched doesn't really change often. It's a normal operation of pulling out the empties of the yard, building the return train for Wildwood in the process. Then, the entire consist is backed onto the original loaded train and finally switched into the yard in 2 cuts. Tonight there'd be another sizable cut of rock for Anderson Columbia and some scrap guns for other industries.
10, 5, and that's good. Clear stress 2813.
Just after midnight, the importance of the double track here would be showed, as amidst L754 switching, trains are still lined through on track 2, bypassing the local in the process. In this case, it'd be another M441 for Tampa, with a very new SD70 rebuild flanked by a couple more GE wide cabs.
Yeah, 441, clear signal, Ocala track 2. Just XD 5450 southbound.
L754 would back his train for Wildwood onto track 1, parking once again right in front of the signal here and requesting a light to move north on the line to 8th Avenue, where a lumber customer resides and evidently is part of this train's switch list.
Alright, let's do the normal. We're down here, Florida Northern, back in motor under your control. We'll go north, drop the train between 8th Avenue and Silver Springs, come back around and run around it up.
Florida Northern line lot back. So on occasion up here, go right around it up there, Silver Spring 8th Avenue.
Alright, then once we run around it, number 2 track, we gotta work the rock man.
Probably get 178 coming by you, or fix it come by you there going north. Probably get 177 south and then go work the rock man.
Understand, thank you.
Yeah.
While 754 was departing, I-178 from the south would sneak up on us as it quietly snakes through town, set to meet its counterpart train at Anthony.
I-177, 20 minutes, CSSD 430, clear signal. Ocala, track number 2, southbound now.
Speaking of it, about 45 minutes would pass when I-177 would appear, with an AC-44 leader and quite the impressive train of intermodal for Winter Haven. This train is an example that non-rail fans use when they say the train kept passing forever. These are the trains, tonight clearing downtown in an impressive 6 minutes at 30 miles an hour. Following the 177 by crossing over to track 2 at 8th Avenue would be L754, rolling through and preparing to stop around the corner in order to switch Conrad Yelvington's distribution yard here. 0253, and a high green would be lit on track 1 for northbound B642. Coming out of Tampa just before midnight, this train would sport one of the weirdest but colorful consists I've ever seen, this one in particular leading a dark snake of ethanol tankers back north to Chicago. Our last train before sunrise would come over an hour later, as one last northbound would be lined through before the daylight's march of southbounds. M442, a train I haven't seen in ages due to its ungodly departure time, would be calling signals on its approach just after 4 a.m. after leaving Tampa around 1. An hour and a half nap's worth of time later would come daybreak and the arrival of M457, with 2 GEs leading a beat-up 4310, a Jeep 39-2. This train's passing would end our night out, as we'd wander back to the hotel and sleep for a few more hours, before once again rising for our last bit of time along the High Island. Lunchtime, we'd find ourselves starting to head south towards home, but a few last trains would be on the radar to catch. First one at Bellevue. Bellevue is a cool spot for me, as an ABS signal guards the distant to Santos approach in the midst of a well-maintained landscape bordered by even better landscaped homes. M452 would trip the signal and light it up, as he'd show his face in just a few minutes with 13,000 horsepower up front. Into Wildwood we go after 452, following US 301 past Dallas, Summerfield, and Oxford, landing down with the rain clouds at Moreland Park, the north end and access point of Wildwood's small but crucial yard. An approach limited would be lit here as L743 approached. He'd be lined through to stop before Coleman, dropping a good cut of cars around Turnpike for this afternoon's L753 local to pick up and bring back into the yard. By the time 743 would show, the clouds have opened up, the light rain just enough to saturate all the colors in this casual Floridian sunny raining scene. South we'd go, pulling off one last time at Bushnell. Heading north would be B207, a loaded phosphate unit train out of Mulberry bound for Cicero, Illinois and the BNSF interchange there. A large trio of locomotive variants would lead this one, all painted for CSX, but not two alike. .207 would cap off a fantastic trip up the S-Line, 3 days of good action and new locations, which is always my favorite part. Thanks to all of y'all who stayed around for this one. I know it's a bit longer than usual, but there was a lot to cover. I hope to see y'all somewhere out there soon, but until that time comes around again, this is Christian for Multicolor Films. End of transmission.